Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Myths, Mysteries, Facts, Truths of the First Fleet. Today we're going to actually be looking at the value of checking primary records and not just taking the facts and what's been written in secondary records when we're actually doing our research. In The Founders of Australia by Molly Gillen, she's actually written about a First Fleet convict, Elizabeth Haywood. And we're all human, please take note, but she's written at Port Jackson on the 9th of February 1788, the young girl, being Elizabeth, was ordered to receive 30 lashes for insolence. I'm just actually going to turn off another light so there's not so much glare on the video. Which is all fine. 9th of February 1788. The female convicts had only just been taken off the ships 2 days beforehand. So that's all fine. So we then went one step further and we checked Cobley's Sydney Cove series. Cobley was very good in regards to cross-referencing all the criminal court records. And he's written, the Supreme Court documents contain a list of names of 6 convicts who were apparently dealt with by the judge advocate. There was Matthew Everingham, 25 lashes for being drunk. Elizabeth Haywood, 30 lashes. Thomas Filsley, Charlotte Wall, Anne Thornton, and also Mary Marshall and Judith Jones, who ended up being the first female convict executed in New South Wales later on. The only issue is Cobley has got the 9th of February, but this is his entry for 1789, the following year. So Molly has inadvertently put the incorrect year. It's actually 1789. We're still using secondary records or secondary writings. On the First Fleet Fellowship website, which is based in Victoria, not the Fellowship of the First Fleeters, there's 2 organisations, it has Elizabeth was assigned to Mary Johnson, wife of the chaplain, the Reverend Richard Johnson, and was a servant in her household until some months later, when on Monday, the 9th of February, 1789, her name is listed in the Supreme Court documents along with 5 other convicts who were apparently dealt with the judge advocate, also known as copy and paste straight from Cobley's. They have not, I can tell you now, before we even get to the end, this entry is wrong. They have copied and pasted from Cobley's Sydney Cove series in the quote, the Supreme Court documents, along with 5 other convicts. They do have the correct year, by the way, so that's good. Some of you may have watched our Law and Order presentations and knowing there's a few ways you can end up being a matter being held at the criminal court, which is the higher of the courts, which is also known as the Supreme Court. You can appear before the bench of magistrates and be deferred over to the criminal court. From the criminal court, you receive a punishment. Or you can appear before the bench of magistrate and receive a punishment. You can appear before the bench of magistrates and the matter be referred to the civil court, who would then make a decision. So there was 3 type of court entries. All the entries for, except Molly, who just has the wrong date, all have the Supreme Court documents. So I thought, let's go and have a look. Let's go and see if the Supreme Court documents actually prove or give evidence that Elizabeth Haywood was actually assigned to Mary Johnson, the wife of Reverend Johnson. So first thing I do is I go to the criminal records for the higher court or the Supreme Court, and I first went to the State Archives of New South Wales Index, and I searched for Elizabeth Haywood, and under every spelling variation I could think for her name. Was not there. Okay, I searched by date. Was not there. I thought, this is quite strange. Where is the primary record? So, because I do have a digital copy of all the records, all the criminal court records and also the bench and magistrate records, I did a manual check of the original source. I did check February 1788, just in case there was an error by Cobley and not by Molly Gillen. No record. And I also did check 1789. No record. Knowing that they all refer to 5 other convicts being dealt with on the same date, automatically told me this is not a Supreme Court document. This is maybe a bench document, because the Supreme Court no way could address 5 different matters in one hearing. So, as I said, was the matter heard against Elizabeth Haywood by the judge advocates a bench matter rather than the Supreme Court? So, back to the New South Wales State Archives Index online of the minutes and proceedings of the judge advocate bench and magistrate. I searched for Elizabeth. I searched for Elizabeth with no surname. I searched for Elizabeth Haywood with every type of spelling variation. I searched for Eliza, E-L-I-Z, wildcard. Nothing was found. So I searched by date. Nothing found. 1788 and 1789. And I'm thinking, well, it's not in the Supreme Court records because I've manually checked the originals. And now it's not even showing up in the State Archives Index of the bench of magistrates. So, where did Molly Gillen get her reference from, even though she did print the wrong date? Where did Cobley get his reference from? So we had to keep looking. I have a data set of my own index of the judge, advocate, bench and magistrate records. And I checked it. And I found it. The 9th of February, 1789. However, her name does not appear, and neither does Matthew Everingham and Charlotte Ware. None of these names appear in the State Archives Index of the bench and magistrate records. So when you are researching and you're searching indexes, that's great. But if you can't find your person in there and you have found all these secondary references, sometimes it's actually best to go to the actual record and scroll through the records, because this is only just at the bottom of the page and could have easily been misled and missed out in the database, that index that's been used by the State Archives, which is actually the case. Please take note, it is Eliza, E-L-I-Z Haywood. So, no, even my searching for in the Eliza or a Haywood or a H-E-Y, I searched every name variation. So this record here is not in the State Archives Index of the bench and magistrate records. And yes, the 9th of February, 1789. And she was ordered to receive, and on a quick glance you go, oh, is that 80 lashes? No, it's not. It's actually 30 lashes. And if we have a closer look at that, you can see that there is actually no tail on or no circle on the bottom of the 8. And it is actually 30 lashes. Thomas Finley, as you can see, was forgiven, and he only actually received 25 lashes. So here we have a 15-year-old girl receiving 30 lashes. I was actually looking for this record because descendants of Elizabeth Haywood are coming to Norfolk Island for HMS Sirius Week, and part of Sirius Week you also receive copies of all the primary records relating to your family or to your individual convict. And one of the people did ask, we've been searching for this record in 1788 that Molly Gillen mentioned. We haven't been able to find it. So this is why we end up doing this podcast, because if you don't go back and check the primary records and just take for granted what was written in the secondary records, which have no citation, which doesn't tell you where to go and to look further at the actual record. This record here doesn't imply that Elizabeth Haywood was an assigned servant of Mrs. Johnson or even Reverend Johnson. That is something I will still continue to find the actual primary record of that. And looking at this, is it Mrs. or is it Mr. Johnson? Who was she disrespectful to or accused of being disrespectful to? On enlarging it, and this is the benefit of computers now, with digital records you can just blow it up, not physically, but you can increase the size to make it easier on the eyes. And I've looked at this and I know all the handwriting in the bench records, and I'm actually on the fence whether it's actually Mr. or Mrs. Johnson. So that possibly requires further research. The convicts would have received their lashes in a public display. It was only the Marines, when they were punished and were receiving lashes, was it done out the back. But for the convicts, it was a public exhibition. So here's the record again. And the fact that it's only 50 lashes, 25 lashes, 30 lashes on this particular record for the group of people automatically indicated to us that it was a bench matter, not a criminal court. The criminal court didn't issue 25 lashes. It just ordered mostly of the time either executions or to be totally banished off to Norfolk Island. So that was the key point in knowing that even though others had written it in the Supreme Court documents that it is being copied from Cobley, who made I dislike the word error. He got his Supreme Court and his bench and magistrate records confused. I did check David Collins, and there's no entry for this matter. It was only a small matter, considering some of the other bench matters that were being held actually at the time. So that the likeness of the small amount of lashes also, as I said before, indicated that it was a bench matter. But by just copying from a secondary record, rewording it slightly, brings up to the conclusion that it must be true. Well, in this case, it was not true. It was not the Supreme Court. It was the bench of magistrates. So if you're writing a story about your ancestor, that's a very important thing, because if you're talking about their life, appearing before the bench of magistrates compared to the Supreme Court is quite a vast difference and experience too. And also reports on the severity of the crime at the time. So, on the 9th of February 1789 at Sydney Cove, not Sydney, The Sydney we know today was not called Sydney back then. It was not called Sydney or the town of Sydney until 1791. It was actually called Albion at this time, so we always say at Sydney Cove. Elizabeth Haywood was sentenced to 30 lashes by the bench of magistrates, not the Supreme Court as quoted in many secondary references. And I always include a citation. Minutes of the proceeding of the Judge Advocate Bench of Magistrates, State Archives, New South Wales, Series Z765, page 139. Do not go to the State Archives website and search for it and try and order a copy of it, because Elizabeth Haywood's name is not even in the index. At the same time, neither is Matthew Everingham's name for this particular record, Mary Marshall, etc. Elizabeth Haywood was sent to Norfolk Island on HMS Sirius. No, not for being naughty. The colony was starving, and they just said, no, Arthur Phillip felt was responsible for the people, and he felt for the people, and he did not know how he was going to cope. King had sent back glowing reports about Norfolk Island with the agriculture and the weather and the conditions, apart from the landing conditions. So Arthur Phillip decided to actually split the settlement into two, one at Albion, Sydney Cove, and sending the other half over to Norfolk Island. This is an image drawn by William Bradley from HMS Sirius, and it's an image of the Supply, which is the ship at the rear, and the Sirius in front before the shipwreck. And they're near the landing place down at Kingston on Norfolk Island. So that's the ship and the voyage that Elizabeth Haywood made to Norfolk Island. In March next year, we've also got the Norfolk Island History Lovers Tour, which is in the first week of March. And once again, all attendees on this, and also the Nathaniel Lucas and associated family musters, all receive copies of primary records relating to your family. So you receive shipping records, you receive convict indents, you receive all the records from the victualling book, all the land records, etc. So, and you receive them actually before you go. So many people I've known have gone to Norfolk Island, they've come back and they found out they've had ancestors down there. So you actually receive the copies before you arrive. They're yours to save onto your hard drive, to print out. Many people actually print them out and actually bring them to Norfolk Island. So we sit down with them and explain how each record is pertaining to their family. And of course, as I said before, we've got the HMS Sirius shipwreck anniversary in mid-May, and on the 19th of March, mid-March. And then on the 19th of March, we have the HMS Sirius 230 shipwreck anniversary. Gee, that name is getting longer and longer. And we this week announced our guest speakers for HMS Sirius Day, which is myself, Kathy Dunn from Australian History Research, and also Liz McCoy, Norfolk Island historian, and Carol Baxter from Historical Detective or History Detective. So that's our short podcast. Yes, Lynn finally found it. I'm going to be keep looking for a primary evidence that Elizabeth Haywood was assigned as a servant. It's very unusual for First Fleet convicts to be assigned to an individual, because Arthur Phillip had a vision that Albion would just be their headquarters, and they had all these convicts to work for the government, not necessarily individuals. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that reference, or the primary evidence or the primary reference that Elizabeth Haywood was assigned to Reverend Johnson or be his wife. Is just presumed because she was not respectful to him or her, because I'm on the fence with that description there. So I'm actually going to keep actually looking in regards to that and finding evidence either A or nay, because it well could be because she was young. She was 15 at the time. She is the youngest First Fleeter convict. So it's this is the point is just because it's written in a secondary book doesn't mean it's exact. If there's a citation, it gives you the citation where you can go and have a look and read the actual evidence yourself. In the case of Jane Langley, it was not the Supreme Court, yet people have copied it. The First Fleet Fellowship that's based in Victoria has literally copied and pasted it word for word from John Cobley without doing any double checking, verifying any of the information. Just because it's written in a book or it's published up on the net doesn't mean it's always true. So, and it's also showing sometimes lack of historical knowledge in regards to the difference between the criminal court and also the bench of magistrates. And we've got Helen who's here. She's actually from Canberra, and she's descended actually from Elizabeth Haywood. I'm actually going to be in Canberra next week. I'm going off to Norfolk Island at the end of next week, and I travel over to Canberra because it's quicker from Ulladulla and easier. And then in the morning of the flight, I get very early in the morning at 4 a.m. I get on a Murray's coach, and it takes me directly to Sydney International Airport. Because to fly to Norfolk Island, you leave Sydney International Airport. Even though you do not need a passport to travel, you still need some form of photo ID. For example, a driver's license. It's easier travelling with your passport. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye-bye.